Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh live on YouTube, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. We got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to start off by talking about where the Penguins stand currently in their schedule, because this is potentially a turning point for their entire season. We've said it time and time again. They need to get going now. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to find success. They need to get going now. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to get back into the playoff picture. Well, at this point, considering their proximity to the Four Nations face-off, considering the proximity to the trade deadline immediately after the Four Nations face-off, they're heading into a very pivotal stretch, especially when you look at some of the opponents that they're going to be facing. We'll get into that to kick off the show, and then we'll have our 3 stars of the week as we do every single Wednesday, and then we'll close this out with a Q&A. So if you're joining us live on Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube right now, make sure you drop your question in the comment section below, and we will get to that at the end of the episode. But let's start things off by talking about really where the Penguins currently stand and what their current performance on this road trip has them at. They started 2025 in an absolutely horrendous way. 2-5-3 in the first 10 games following the holiday break, including a 1-3-1 homestand that kind of took the wind out of the Pittsburgh Penguins' sails, because once they had that horrible stretch of games at home, that dropped them as low as 14th in the Eastern Conference. And yet, they were able to turn things around over this past week. 2-1 to begin this road trip. They had a nice win over Buffalo. Obviously, a lot of feel-good moments with Alex Nedeljkovic in the against the Buffalo Sabres. They had a tough night in Washington where, let's just face it, the Capitals were the better team. They allowed the Capitals to get to their game, which was a 1 or 2 goal lead, and then the Caps just suffocated them. And at the end of the day, that's what the Caps have been doing to everybody. They did it to the Penguins once again on Saturday night. And then the Penguins had a great performance. Probably the best performance that we have seen from them, top to bottom, all season long. 60-minute effort. They played well when they had the lead. They kind of kicked it into high gear late in the second period whenever they started to lose momentum. Their goaltending stood up when he needed to. The defense played well. You got goals from both Sidney, Crosby, and your Evgeni Malkins, but you also got goals from your Cody Glasses. You got 2-point performances from your Kevin Hayeses. So that was a fantastic performance against the LA Kings. Now, I could sit up here and just say they need to replicate that. They need to be that team more often than not for the remainder of the season. But considering the fact that that's the first time that we've seen it all of this season, that's the best we've seen from all of last season as well, I think it's pretty hard to believe that they're going to be able to go out there and replicate that specific performance that they showed against the LA Kings throughout the remainder of the season. But with that in mind, they have an opportunity because they're kind of out of that post-Christmas funk now, 2-1 over the past week. They need to continue on that stretch. 8 games until the Four Nations face-off break, including 4 remaining games on this road trip, and then a nice 4-game stint where you have 2 at home and 2 on the road. You look at the remainder of this road trip. At Anaheim tomorrow night, at Seattle over the weekend, at San Jose on Monday, and at Utah on Wednesday. So a lot of games and not a lot of days. And yet, you look at that, match it with the rest of their schedule leading into the Four Nations face-off: at home against Nashville, at home against New Jersey, at the New York Rangers, and at the Philadelphia Flyers. Of those 8 games remaining, only one of those teams is currently sitting in a playoff spot, and that's the New Jersey Devils. The Penguins have a chance to climb back and kind of wipe away the struggles and wipe away that rough stretch that they had immediately following the holiday break. Because we talked a lot about how successful they were from Thanksgiving to Christmas and how it salvaged their season. Those were the words that I used, that it salvaged their season. They immediately kind of negated it with their 10 games from the end of the Christmas break until the beginning of this road trip. They're going to have to wipe it away again. They're going to have to salvage it again here in these 8 games leading into the Four Nations face-off. Because if they don't, at that point, you've pretty much run out of time. If you're coming out of the Four Nations face-off break and you're still 6 points, 8 points back of the playoffs, having played the most games out of anybody in the East, it's near impossible for the Penguins to come back. They'd have to do something that they haven't done in a long time, which is just consistently win 5-game-plus win streaks over 5-game-plus win streaks. They need to make their hay here, especially considering the fact that they're playing 5 of the 6 worst teams in the Western Conference over this stretch. They're playing a Philadelphia Flyers team that they beat 7-3 in their only matchup. They're playing a Nashville Predators team that they've already beaten this year. The 2 games that I think should be the most worrisome are against the New Jersey Devils. Fortunately, that's in Pittsburgh because the Pens play the Devils better in Pittsburgh than they do at the Rock. And then you have a matchup against the New York Rangers, who I know a lot of people all in all are going to say, hey, that's not a team to worry about. They're 6-0-3 over their last 9. So that's a team that you're going to be contending with. You need to be able to make your bank, make your money over the next 8 games. You need to pick up consistent wins over this stretch. Am I going to go as far to say that they need to be 8-0? No, because I don't expect them to be 8-0. But if they want to have a chance coming out of the Four Nations faceoff, if they want Kyle Dubas to have faith in this team this season, they need to win 6 of 8. That's a heavy lift, but you have the schedule to do it. You've shown that right now you can play at the level to beat these teams because they played at that level against the LA Kings, which is a better team than everybody else on this list that I just mentioned, especially when you're thinking of the fact that you're playing in LA, your 3rd game in 4 days that had a cross-country flight sandwiched in the middle of it. They can do it. Can they do it consistently? And can they do it against lesser opponents? Because that, all in all, I mean, yeah, maybe you can say it's equal opponents because the Penguins are also in the bottom 5 in their conference, but you should be able to take care of business if you want to be taken seriously as a potential playoff contender. Before we go to your questions, I want to do my 3 stars of the week. And this is always a segment that I enjoy, sitting down, kind of following along throughout the week and moving people up and down in my list. This week, it was pretty easy. This week, we're going to kick things off with number 3. Whenever you look at that game against LA on Monday, there was one player that kind of stood out among the rest. In a game where everybody and their mother played well for the Pittsburgh Penguins, one player was the most noticeable. That was Anthony Beauvillier. The guy stepped up in a huge way as Rickard Rakell left the team for personal reasons. Beauvillier moved up to that first line. He looked like he had a little bit of an extra step. You'd love to see him maintain that. And again, potentially he can. He potentially could do that the remainder of this road trip against the Anaheims, against the San Jose's, against the Utahs, against the Seattles. If he does that, it's going to go a long way to getting the Penguins the results that they want. 3 games played over this past week, 2 goals, including a goal and an assist on Monday, as well as a goal in their win over the Buffalo Sabres. Beauvillier has been very good for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's move to number 2, Cody Glass. Similar stat line, 2 goals, 1 assist in 3 games played over the past week. Everybody has loved his game all season long. The one problem with Cody Glass, just couldn't finish. He just couldn't finish his opportunities. He couldn't quite get to that next step. He couldn't get to that final step and put the puck in the back of the net. Well, he's finishing now. He has goals in 2 of his last 3 games. He's playing well in different spots in the lineup, whether that be up next to Evgeni Malkin, whether that be down on the 4th line next to Nola Chari and Blake Lizotte, or if it's on the 3rd line with Kevin Hayes. It looks like Cody Glass is starting to finally kind of find a rhythm, find a groove for the Penguins, despite the fact that he is being tossed every which way by the coaching staff when it comes to where he's playing, who he's playing with. He's finishing his chances, and he's doing a really good job for the Penguins over this road trip. Let's finish things off here with number 1, and that's going to be Alex Nedeljkovic. There's really no one else that the first star of the week could go to this week other than Alex Nedeljkovic. It feels like he may have taken that Jari demotion as a challenge, right? Since Jari was sent down, Alex Nedeljkovic is 2-0-0, has a 1.5 goals against average, a .956 save percentage, and 3.76 goals saved above expected. Now, here's the thing. That stat in and of itself is one that a lot of people point to as to, hey, how is your goaltender performing? Well, on the season, before these last 2 games, Alex Nedeljkovic had a grand total of -7.3 .26 goals saved above expected. Now, he's kind of cut that in half in 2 games. So when I say it feels like he took that Jarry demotion as a challenge, he really has. It looks like the coaching staff may have told him, may have not. He might have just known that it was implied whenever that move happened last week. Hey, this is your opportunity to kind of take that number 1 spot and run with it. Obviously, they're going to give Yoel Blomqvist an opportunity, but Nedeljkovic is the incumbent. Nedeljkovic is the guy that they have gone to. He's the guy that they went to late last season. So it feels like there was an opportunity on the table for Ned whenever Jarry got sent down. Hey, step up or step back, because they're going to give Joel Blomqvist your starts. They're going to give him the ice time if you don't pick things up. Well, Ned has picked things up in a big way. Again, only 2 games, but he was fantastic in Buffalo. 1 goal, 1 assist. Obviously, making NHL history is great, but he was solid at doing his job. He was great in the crease, and he was solid once again in Los Angeles. Not getting tested too much, right? He had 240 save performances against Edmonton and against Buffalo. Against LA, he didn't even have to make 30 saves, but he made the timely saves, and that was huge for the Penguins in that game. So 3 stars of the week: Anthony Beauvillier at number 3, Cody Glass at number 2, and Alex Nedeljkovic ranks in at the number 1 star of this week. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, answering all of your questions. So if you're tuned in live at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube, make sure you drop a question in the comment section. We'll get to as many as we can before we leave here today. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. We got plenty of questions to get to, so we'll dive right in, starting with Gunnar Murphy, who says, do you think Dubas should still attempt to retool this year? Seems like they may be a bubble team again, and if the right moves are made, they could sneak in. Yeah, I don't think you abandon the retool, or if you want to call it a shotgun rebuild. I've seen people call it that as well, but I would imagine that their performance this year has done nothing to change that fact, has done nothing to change that trajectory, has done nothing to change that plan for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yeah, they could be a bubble team. They could sneak into the playoffs, but they're going to do that on their own merit. I think what you're going to see is Kyle Dubas not blow the team up. I know we talked about that yesterday on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh, the reports from rg.org that they're looking to, quote, do a fire sale. When I mentioned that yesterday, when we talked about it yesterday, I said, yeah, they might have a lot of people available, but that doesn't mean they're going to trade everybody. We'll get to obviously plenty of questions revolving around the trade deadline, with that being about 6 weeks away. But I don't think that they've been good enough to warrant kind of changing the trajectory of the overall organization, which is they are retooling while still trying to give this team a chance to maybe sneak in. The goal is not to do that. The goal is not to, hey, we need to add players because they might be able to be a wild card 2 team this year. The plan is over time, they're trying to become a top 3 team perennially in the Metropolitan Division and be a team that is looked at as a contender by the end of Crosby's tenure. I don't think they're going to change anything about their plan based on what I've seen from this team this season. Let's go over to Football Goat CR7, a Ronaldo fan, if we've ever seen one, says, if we trade Marcus Pettersson, what will be the return for him? I think you get a couple of assets because I do think he's going to be one of the best defensive defensemen available on the market. But the question then becomes, how many teams are going to want a defensive defenseman on the market, and how many teams are going to see themselves as buyers? The East is wide open, right? Those last 2 playoff spots are wide open. So a lot of teams, especially those that haven't had playoff opportunities in recent years, the Detroit Red Wings, the Montreal Canadiens, the Ottawa Senators that are in there, maybe even the New York Islanders who've missed missed last year. I can't remember if they made it 2 years ago. Are those teams going to fancy themselves as buyers, or are they going to look at themselves still as sellers or somebody to stand pat? Because the market is going to judge what Marcus Pettersson is going to go for. But I think overall, you're looking at probably a 2nd or 3rd round pick and probably a B+ tier prospect. And I don't think you get a 3rd asset in return for Marcus Pettersson, but I do think you get at least 2. Now, could that potentially go up to more NHL ready prospect because that's what Kyle Dubas is looking for? Potentially. Could that go for 2 C prospects or 2 D prospects that the Penguins have full faith that once they get their hands on them, they could turn it around? Yeah, there's always that negotiating. But I think if you're looking for the best return possible, the best you're going to get is probably a 2nd round pick and a B to B+ prospect for Marcus Pettersson. Let's go to Austin, who wants to know, if the season ended today, which UFAs and RFAs would you extend based off of their production? So I pulled up the Penguins on Puckpedia here to look at who's going to be RFAs, who's going to be UFAs. And of course, there have been a couple questions a little bit lower about individuals in particular. So I'll save it. The majority of my thoughts for those ones. Cody Glass, RFA, yes. Anthony Beauvillier, UFA. If he makes it to the end of the season, depending on how he performs over the next 3, I would think of extending Anthony Beauvillier. Drew O'Connor, same boat. If he's still on your team, I look into extending him. Matt Nieto, no, I'm letting Matt Nieto walk, I think, based on what I've seen so far. Phil Tomasino is an RFA. I'm re-signing him. Marcus Pettersson, we know that there's been a lot of non-discussion. At least that's what Josh Yohe said in The Athletic earlier today. So there hasn't been a lot of discussion between Dubas and Pettersson's representatives. So again, a player that I'm not sure is going to make it to the end of the season in Pittsburgh. Matt Grzelcyk. That's interesting because he's been very good for Erik Karlsson. He's been very good for the power play, but he hasn't been great in all the other areas. In fact, before this last stretch of 17 games, he wasn't good at all in a lot of those areas. He's gotten a lot better as the season's gone on. I think of re-signing him, but I certainly want a discount on that 2.75. But you might not get it considering the point production that he's put up this season. So again, that's a maybe. P.O. Joseph, sure. It's going to be inexpensive. He's a guy that could be your 7th defenseman. If you get upgrades over him on the left side, you could still bring him back as a 7th. So I would say yes to P.O. Joseph. Ryan Shea, you can take it or leave it. He's been fine at points. He's also been really bad at other points for the Penguins. I just think that you can replace a Ryan Shea if need be. It's not at the top of my list. In fact, it's probably, of all these players, at the bottom of my list. So those are all the players. Those are all the RFAs and UFAs that are at the NHL level as of right now. Let's go to Flux CC, who, and this is why I wanted to wait. AFP Analytics is predicting 2 years, 1.7 for Cody Glass, and 2 years, 1.5 for Phil Tomasino. Do you extend them both if you're the general manager of the Penguins? At those prices, 100%. I'm bringing back Phil Tomasino. I'm bringing back Cody Glass. I've liked what both of them have been able to do in a Penguins uniform, and I think there's still more meat on the bone for both of these young guys. I think the Penguins have a handful of young forwards that they want to see get opportunities in the next couple of years currently in the AHL. Guys like Tristan Brose, guys like Ville Koivunen, guys like Rutger McGroarty. But when you have players that are showing and proving that they can play at the NHL level, and I think Cody Glass is 24 years old, Tomasino is 23 years old, you don't just let those guys go, especially whenever they're willing to come back on good deals. So if those are the deals that they end up going for, 100%, I'm re-signing both Glass and Tomasino. Let's go over to That's Right, who says, other than a buyout, what's the plan to ditch Tristan Jarry and Ryan Graves? I don't know if there is one, because I don't know if there's a team in the NHL, a general manager in the NHL, that's going to bail out the Pittsburgh Penguins, specifically with Tristan Jarry. Ryan Graves, it's unlikely that they'd be able to offload him in a trade without retaining salary, because that's the goal, because that's 4 more years of retaining salary. Not great if you're the Penguins. But I think Graves, there's more of a likelihood because the cap number is lower, matched with the fact that the salary cap is expected to make a ginormous jump this year, which is going to make that salary cap a little easier to take on from Ryan Graves. And he's proven this season, when given the opportunity, that he can perform at this level, something that Tristan Jarry just hasn't done this year. So I don't know if there is a plan on how to get out from Tristan Jarry. This might just be a, hey, we'll try to figure it out in the offseason. We can't figure it out now. Put him on waivers, send him to the AHL, out of sight, out of mind for Tristan Jarry. Ryan Graves, I think there's more of a likelihood that you could find a general manager who wants to give him an opportunity, who has a defense core and potentially a partner that matches up better with Ryan Graves than an Erik Karlsson does, than a Kris Letang does, because we've seen that in Pittsburgh, and for the most part, it just hasn't worked. The contract's tough, but I think it's easier to move Graves because he's proven to be more playable than a guy like Tristan Jarry. Not to mention, there's only so many spots the teams can take on for goaltender. There's a lot more leeway, a lot more flexibility when it comes to blue liners. So I think Ryan Graves, trade, potentially. Still a long shot, but potentially. Tristan Jarry, I don't know. Buyout's tough to swallow, but buyout might be the only option if you don't want him playing for your team in 2025-26. Let's go to Zach Kemp, who says, with the drama and struggles in Vancouver, do you think they will still look to add Marcus Pettersson? If so, what about Nils Höglander and a second rounder for the return? I think that makes a lot of sense. It kind of goes in line with what I was talking about with the potential return for Marcus Pettersson earlier in this episode. I'm fairly certain that Vancouver would still want to make a deal for Pettersson. I'm fairly certain that Vancouver would still believe that they can get into the playoffs and make some noise, because they have all the talent that was there last year that did just that. And if you look at where they're at in the standings right now, they're just outside of a playoff spot. And they have some games in hand on teams like Colorado that they can make up some ground. They have games in hand, a game in hand on Vegas and Edmonton, even though there are a lot of points back there. But they're right next to the Calgary Flames. They're right in the mix, and they're a team that's going for it right now. So if they can try to figure things out, first and foremost, they need to move JT Miller. They need to get that trade done because it's holding up the entire league. But once they do that, I could see them still going out and adding Marcus Pettersson, because I feel like they look at that as not just a rental. They look at that as a piece that they're going to bring in and likely try to re-sign. So I think that despite the fact that they've fallen out of a playoff spot at the moment, they'd still look to add Pettersson. I do think Höglander in a second is around what you can expect for potentially that return. Let's go over to Brandon, who says, who can you see being traded besides the likes of Pettersson, Grzelcyk, Beauvillier, and O'Connor? I can't see Achari being moved due to his trade clause. You hit the nail on the head, and I honestly don't think you're going to see. I think it's most likely, and this, of course, echoes the sentiment that Josh Yohe put in The Athletic earlier today. Pettersson is most likely. O'Connor is most likely. Grzelcyk, I'm not sure other teams are going to look at that and say, yeah, we'll take that on that 2.75 for the rest of the year. I'm not sure, unless it's a team that really needs power play help or really needs power play to help. I'm not sure a team that is trying to go for a cup is going to bring in somebody who's been a defensive liability most of the season. I think that's going to be a harder sell. Beauvillier, as his play continues to progress the way it has, I think becomes more and more of a serious trade candidate. We talked yesterday on Tip of the Ice-Burgh about how well he performed in Vancouver whenever he was traded for the first time from New York Islanders to Vancouver, how good he was post-trade deadline that year. I think there's teams that are going to look at that and then see him continuing to play better, especially if he has a stretch here with Sidney Crosby. I think you're going to see teams that really get in on Anthony Beauvillier. I also agree, Noel Acciari has a modified no trade clause, has another year left on that contract, is overpaid for what he brings to the Penguins, especially whenever your penalty kill, and him specifically on the penalty kill, is struggling to this level. I don't know if Acciari is going to get moved. And then the only other name I can think of, and this is a long shot based on what we've seen happen over the past week, if Alex Nedeljkovic plays well and somebody blows away the Penguins with an offer, I could see them potentially saying, hey, we can't pass up on this opportunity. Again, they would have to be blown away because as of right now, it seems like they're trying to out of sight, out of mind with Tristan Jarry. And if they trade Nedeljkovic, that would mean Jarry needs to come back up. But I could see Nedeljkovic potentially getting into conversations and into trade rumors as March 7th kind of approaches. Let's go to Flux CC, who says, David Pagnotta mentioned today that Dallas, Winnipeg, Vancouver, and Ottawa are all in trade talks about Marcus Pettersson. Where's he going to land? Imagine if we got Braden Yeager back from Winnipeg. That would be pure cinema. I don't think Winnipeg would be that stupid. It'd be great for the Penguins to get back there, who was formerly their top prospect, and be able to just say, hey, we traded away a guy that we knew we were trading, and we got to keep both Braden Yeager and Rutger McGroarty. It would be great. I think everybody would be praising Kyle Dubas. And of course, it depends on what the rest of that. I mean, that might be the only trade piece. If you're getting Yeager back, you're probably not getting a second round pick. You're probably not getting a third round pick. You might hope for a fourth and a fifth attached onto that. But again, Yeager would be the prize if that was the trade. But I highly doubt that the Winnipeg Jets are going to wind up doing that. I don't think it's going to be Ottawa either, because I think Ottawa is going to be battling with the Penguins, and I just don't know if they're going to be willing to make that move. I would say it's still more than likely Vancouver. They have the pieces that make it make sense, and I feel like that relationship there if it's been rumored for 5 years, which it feels like it has been, I would probably lean towards Vancouver if I was a betting man. Now, that's just a prediction. That's no insider information. But if you put those four names in front of me and say, who's most likely to land Marcus Pettersson, I'm still sticking with Vancouver. Let's go to Brandon's question. Brandon wants to know, why do you think the Penguins have kept Ryan Shea on the roster all of this season and the majority of last year? I just don't think he provides that much, and yet other players get waived besides him. There really hasn't been many defensemen that were waived this year by the Penguins. I understand why they wanted to keep Shea up at the beginning of the season over a John Ludwig, which is why Ludwig went on waivers. But outside of that, they really haven't had any players that got placed on waivers on the blue line. Ryan Shea has proven to be serviceable at times. He's proven to be more than serviceable at other times. Look at late last season, that run they went on, 8-3-3. Ryan Shea and Jack St. Ivany were the third pairing. And I know everybody wanted to praise Jack St. Ivany, and rightfully so, because he played well, especially in his first taste of NHL action. Ryan Shea elevated his game as well. Ryan Shea had a pretty good end of last season, which is why they brought him back, which is why he started the season at the NHL level. Him and Jack St. Ivany were both up here. You figured you could probably recreate that if need be. He's a serviceable seventh defenseman. He's a serviceable eighth defenseman right now because of the addition of P.O. Joseph, because of the emergence of Owen Pickering. So they're keeping him around because he can play both sides. He can be that third pairing defenseman if you need him to be. And he can do that while not playing a majority of the time, right? He's been a healthy scratch for a very, very long time. He can step in, and you're not going to have to see him knock off the rust as much as you'll have to see with other guys. It's the same reason that Chad Ruhwedel stuck around. Now, Chad Ruhwedel was at a little bit of a higher level because that's a guy that you could see becoming an everyday third pairing defenseman for 82. I don't think that Ryan Shea could do that, but I still think they see him as a serviceable depth option that can come in cold and get those opportunities. And as far as why wouldn't they send him down? They only have so many minutes at the AHL level too. And they got a lot of young defensemen that are demanding playing time down there. They got a lot of defensemen that they want to see a lot out of. Nathan Clerman, for example, and Isaac Beliveau, for example, Philip Kral, for example. If you send down Ryan Shea, you're taking away minutes from these young guys that you want to see develop. You want to get ice time at that level. Let's go over to Brandon's second question here, which is, should the Penguins think of moving Blake Lizotte back up to third line center? Sully obviously really likes him with Nieto and Achari, but you can just tell he has more offense to give. He does, but what I'll say about this right now, based on what we've seen the last week and a half, honestly, based on what we've seen since the other third line center got back into the lineup, if it ain't broke, what are you trying to fix? I think Kevin Hayes has been very good in that role. I think Kevin Hayes has been good in that role, not just with his own performance, but as we talked about yesterday, with the way that he's able to kind of shepherd along these young wingers, Phil Tomasino, Drew O'Connor, Cody Glass. I think they're learning from his ability and capabilities on that third line. So I like Kevin Hayes as 3C right now. So for that reason, yeah, just keep Blake Lizotte at 4C. It's working well with him down there. Would I love to see him get some more offensively capable wingers? Yes, because I think Blake Lizotte does. I agree with you, Brandon. He has more to give in the offensive zone. He doesn't have the wingers to pull it off, but I think knowing that he has more to give allows you to build that fourth line with a little bit more thought to the offensive end of the ice going into next season. He's proven that, hey, that multi-year contract you gave him, great idea, because he can be a fourth line center on a primarily defense first line, or he can be a fourth line center on a line that can play drive and drive some offense and score goals. So I like what they've gotten out of Blake Lizotte, and I understand that it's frustrating when it feels like he has more to give offensively, but whenever it's Noel Achari and Matt Nieto, you're not really going to get those results. But right now, I think it's not broken. So why would you try to fix it in the Penguins' bottom six? I think he's working fine as 4C, and I think Kevin Hayes specifically is working fine at 3C, so you don't really need to switch those guys. Let's go to Gunnar Murphy, who says, who is one middle six player or role defenseman that instantly makes the Penguins a playoff team? I don't think there is one. I don't think bringing in another defenseman, unless you're going out to get like a crazy defenseman, which they're not going to. I don't think there's a role defenseman or a middle six player that instantly elevates them to that status, because I think they're more than that away from being a certified bona fide playoff team this year. There's a difference between a bubble team, which is what they are, and a certified bona fide playoff team. Adding a middle six player, adding a role defenseman is not going to get them there. So I don't think there is one. If you add a top six player and you're able to wrestle one away from a team that they've fallen out of favor with, aka a guy like Trevor Zegras, that elevates you if he comes in and fits. But I don't think there's a middle six player that's going to come in and be, really good on that third line and take this Penguins team to another level. I just think they're more than one player away, especially one role player instead of star player away from becoming that bona fide playoff team. Let's go to Brian's question here. Brian says, hey, Nick, if you're the GM, do you trade or keep Rickard Rakell? If it's me, I'm keeping that top line intact. Would I get fired for having my head in the clouds by refusing a complete fire sale? No, you wouldn't get fired, because Penguins organization, their front office, they don't want a complete and utter burn it to the studs rebuild. Now, Rickard Rakell is an interesting question, because I'm sure there's a lot of teams that would be willing to not just pay up for Rickard Rakell, but I'm sure there's a lot of teams that would be willing to overpay for Rickard Rakell because of the season that he's having. But if I'm the general manager and nobody blows me away with an offer, I'm holding on to him for the rest of the season. Because if you trade him right now, the Penguins, I think, are still one top six forward shy of having a complete top six. You trade him away, you're then two top six forward shy of having a complete top six. And you're not going to replace that in season. If you're trading away Rakell, you're not going to replace that in season. It's just not going to happen. I think if you trade him in the summer, maybe the price is a little bit lower than you get him for at the deadline, but you still get him the rest of the season. You still get that production the rest of the season, And then you can go around and see what the price and what the value is for Rickard Rakell this offseason. At that point, you make the move because you have more time to go out and replace him. They didn't replace Jake Gensel, and that felt like it was a choice. If you move on from Rickard Rakell, matched with the fact that the salary cap is going to be way up, I think the Penguins are more likely to be able to replace Rickard Rakell. That's what I would be thinking if I was Kyle Dubas. Not trading him in season because you can't replace him in season, and you still want to give the Penguins a shot. If you take away Rakell, the Penguins have no shot over an extended period of time. I understand. He wasn't on the ice on Monday, and they played their best game. Might be a little bit of fool's gold in that. It's one game. I think they need Rickard Rakell if they want any chance of battling to the end with this team. So I would hold on to Rickard Rakell. No, I don't think that you'd get fired for having your head in the clouds if you ended up agreeing with me. Let's go over to Brandon again, who says, why don't the Penguins go back to the fourth line of Hayes, Glass, and Achari? That line worked extremely well in the first 2 weeks, and they just seemingly never went back to it. That line worked really well early on because Noel Acciari was playing really well early on. That's where I would be a little cautious here, because right now Kevin Hayes is playing well with Drew O'Connor. Kevin Hayes is playing really well with Phil Tomasino. Kevin Hayes is playing really well when he gets the opportunities with Cody Glass. I don't think putting Hayes and Acciari together is something that would benefit the Penguins' bottom six anymore. I think Hayes is always going to be at the pace, the foot speed that Hayes is at. That's just a fact of life at this time. But I think you need to surround him with guys that are going to be able to get in on the forecheck, with guys that are going to be able to utilize their speed to make life difficult on opposing teams. O'Connor does that. Tomasino does that. Glass does that. Having Hayes and Acciari out there at the same time, I think you're just a little bit too many steps behind as a line. And one player, whether that's Cody Glass in the middle or that's Blake Lizotte in the middle, that one player is not going to be enough to kind of make up for the entire line's slow foot speed. I like Hayes. I think that the things he does well makes up for it. And I think that calm demeanor, that smooth skating ability, that smooth puck handling ability in the offensive zone makes up for it a lot. But you need to be able to get him the puck in the offensive zone. And I think if he's stuck with Acciari and put back with Acciari and put back with Glass or put back with Matt Nieto, I don't think you're going to see the same things out of Hayes just because he's not going to have the same opportunities. Let's scroll back here and look at some of these other questions, starting with Flux CC, who says, who is the first call-up from Wilkes-Barre after the trade deadline, if any? Now, the Penguins are only going to have a handful of call-ups. It depends, obviously, on who they end up trading away. I'm not sure there's going to be a need to call up a defenseman because right now they're sitting at 8 at the NHL roster. And even if they trade Pettersson, which is expected, even if they trade Pettersson, you're able to bump up Owen Pickering and then P.O. Joseph and then put Ryan Graves back into the lineup or put Ryan Shea back into the lineup. So I don't think it's a defenseman. If you're looking at the forwards, 90% of the time, the Penguins just pluck away who's been playing the best at the AHL. That's what it is. They ride the hot hand for call-ups. They did it with Jonathan Gruden last year. They did it with Valtteri Puustinen at one point last year. They did it with Sam Poulin at one point. A lot of the time, it's just dependent on who's performing the best. But I do think there is one player in particular, if he's healthy and if he's playing well, they are going to want to see at the NHL level, and that's Vasily Ponomarev. They wanted to get him NHL ice time last year, and he got hurt. So if they get to the point where the trade deadline's come and gone, and they move some players that therefore opening up spots at the NHL level, I would be surprised if Ponomarev wasn't high on their list. Now, like I said, if somebody else is playing better, say Tristan Brose comes back from the injury that he's currently rehabbing and he picks up where he left off and all of a sudden he is lighting the world on fire once again, they're going to run with that. Emil Bemstrom, they re-signed that guy. Not only did they re-sign that guy, but he's been very good at the AHL level this year. He was named to the All-Star team in the AHL. Is he a guy, potentially, if he continues to perform well, that ends up high on that list? I would imagine so. So I think it's a matter of who's playing well at the time, but Ponomarev is a name that I would certainly keep my eyes on because they wanted to give him a shot last year. Dubas said it. right after the Gensel trade. We're going to get Ponomarev here. We're going to get him some ice time at the NHL level. He got injured. It didn't happen. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to get him some ice time down the tail end of this season. Let's go to Jason Hicks, who says, big fan of the show, guys. Thanks for bringing the content every day. Do you sell this season or look for more assets? Here's the thing about where the Penguins are at. They're kind of playing the middle, and you can only do that effectively for so long. But they're playing the middle, and so far they've done it well, right? They added when they got Kevin Hayes this offseason. They also added draft capital in order to do that and traded away nothing in exchange. They got Kevin Hayes, and I think we can all agree that especially over the last 10 games, Kevin Hayes has been good for the Penguins. It's also good that in the future, they'll have those draft picks that they got for absolutely nothing. They did the same thing with Cody Glass. They did the same thing with Phil Tomasino. Now, there's only so many of those situations to go around in the NHL, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they were keying in on and ended up bringing somebody in similar to that Phil Tomasino. I mean, names out there right now are Nils Höglander. We've mentioned him already. Trevor Zegras, I'm going to keep pounding the drum for that one. He's out there still. Nick Robertson, you can check back in on that situation because it wasn't pretty last summer. It's quieted down a little bit as the season's gone on, but you'd have to imagine they're still feeling some type of way between Robertson's camp and the Toronto Maple Leafs. So there are those situations out there, and I'm sure there's some that I'm missing or some that we haven't heard about that general managers are aware of and they can go out and take advantage of. So I think that's the type of move that you could see, but I also think you're going to see some trades. I think you're going to see some selling from Kyle Dubas. But like I said, it's kind of him playing the middle. You just have to be careful when you do it. He's done it well over the past this season and last summer. I'll say that. I've liked the moves that he's made. I like the Yeager from McGroarty trade. And I think what you're seeing right now is Rucker McGroarty start to show you why they made the trade, the way that he's playing in the AHL, the way that he's progressing. So I think that I'm looking for him to kind of play the middle the same way that he has been since last offseason began. Let's go to Bobby, who says, is Ned going to get the majority of the games on this road trip? That is all the ways up to Mike Sullivan, and you never know. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there is not any more back-to-backs, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just rode the hot hand. Alex Nedeljkovic has been very, very good, and there is no back-to-backs. They play Thursday, Saturday, Monday, Wednesday. Of those 3 games, I would not be surprised if it went 2-2. Nedeljkovic gets 2, Blomqvist gets 2. But it's all going to depend on the performances, right? If Blomqvist comes in and he's shutting everybody down and he gets a shutout, which the Penguins haven't done that all season long. So if he comes in and gets a shutout and performs well, they might give him another game. They might say, hey, you looked really good in that last game. It looks like you're in the zone. Give him another game. I mean, Mike Sullivan, a lot of the times determines the starting goaltender based on riding the hot hand. Right now, Nedeljkovic has a hot hand, so I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 3 and Blomqvist gets 1. But I think more than likely, you look at these next 4 games, the fact that there's 1 day off in between each of them, yeah, there's a strong possibility that going into it, they're looking at this as, hey, we're going to give 2 and 2. If somebody blows us away, we're just going to give them the net as long as they're ready to go. Let's go to the next question down here as I read through some of these ones. Let's go to Brandon, who's had a couple today. Says, if the Penguins trade both Pettersson and Grzelcyk at the deadline, wouldn't that essentially slot Graves in the top 4 for the remainder of the season if they don't get another defenseman back in a trade? It could, but I think what's more likely is Owen Pickering, as long as he doesn't hit a rookie wall. Owen Pickering moves up. Play him. We'll see where, because he played with Karlsson for 1 game and it didn't look awful, but you could tell that those two hadn't played together before. And Pickering is probably never, ever, even the fact that he's played with Letang, he's never played with a defenseman like Erik Karlsson. It's going to take some time to get used to that. Not just 20 minutes of ice time in 1 singular game. But I think it ends up being some combination of Pickering and P.O. Joseph in the top 4. Ryan Graves becomes an everyday player in the top 3 if they end up trading away Grzelcyk and Pettersson at the deadline. Let's go over to Bobby again, who says, do you look at trying to get out of a restructuring Erik Karlsson's deal. You can't restructure the deal. It's not the NFL, which makes the NFL very hard to follow because they restructure all the time. NHL contracts are guaranteed. Erik Karlsson's contract is Erik Karlsson's contract, and it will remain that way unless he gets traded and there's retention. So he will have years remaining, 2 years remaining at $10 million if he stays in Pittsburgh. That's just what it's going to be. Do I look at trying to get out of it? Certainly don't buy it out. I haven't looked at the buyouts, but I can imagine a contract with 2 years and $10 million a year left. The buyout is not palatable. So buying out's not an option. Do you look to trade him? Again, I didn't make the trade to acquire him, so I would have no problems, again, looking to potentially get out of it, especially considering you're going to have a lot of salary cap space next summer. If you get out of a $10 million deal, even with, let's say, $2 million retained or 2.5 retained, you certainly don't retain half. You can't retain $5 million for 2 years. But if you retain $2 million, if you retain 2.25 or something like that, if there's somebody willing to take it and give you assets back, I think I would look into that. Simply because of everybody, I lean more towards the rebuild right now. I lean more towards try to get assets, try to open up cap space, and maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, you can try to go in for one last run with Crosby. But I just don't think they're there right now. Now, again, if I trade Karlsson, if I'm the GM and I do that, what's more important is the follow-up. Obviously, you don't want to get fleeced in the Karlsson deal, but you have to be able to follow it up. You have to be able to weaponize that cap space that you opened up in a very positive way. Because at the end of the day, even if Karlsson isn't living up to your expectations, he's still a future Hall of Famer, and he's still, at points, performs like it. And right now just happens to be one of those points. He's on about a 2-3 week heater where he's playing some phenomenal hockey. So you're trading that away, knowing that there's a chance that he could just get to that level and stay at that level for an entire season. He did it in his last year in San Jose. If he does it in Pittsburgh, you're going to be hard-pressed to find anybody that brings that type of impact on your team. So there are repercussions either way. Let's see what other questions there are here. Let's go to Brian, and then I'm just going to make sure that I have a couple of these stocked up here. We got a lot of repeat questions, so I appreciate you guys tuning in. All right, we got 5 questions here. Let's get to them here. Let's go to Jason next, who says, is there a place for Stamkos to be traded, possibly to Pittsburgh? What did Steven Stamkos sign for? First of all, as somebody who has loved to watch Steven Stamkos, would love to see him on this team. You know, the Penguins haven't had the perfect guy on the left half wall on the power play since Phil Kessel left. Now, this year, has Matt Grzelcyk looked good? Yes. This year, has anybody that's really played there, because the Penguins power play has been good, has everybody looked good? Yes. But you put Steven Stamkos on that side, you're probably going to find a lot of success. Stamkos is in year 1 of a 4-year contract with $8 million. I love Stamkos. I'm not trading for a 34-year-old with an $8 million cap hit. Not one that is played at the level that he's played this season. Just not doing it. But would I love to have seen it 5 years ago? Yes. But he was winning Stanley Cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning at the time, and that wasn't going to happen. Let's go over to Daniel, who says, do you trade away current players to bring back more bad contracts with prospects and picks going forward? I don't think you ever bring back. I mean, there's a chance you bring in rough contracts. They did it with Kevin Hayes, but it has to be measured. You're not just going to say, hey, is that a problem? And like, you're not going to other teams and saying, hey, give me your Ryan Graves player, but also give me a 2nd round pick with them, because you can't bring in players that aren't going to be successful, that aren't going to be fits. I think that's why the Kevin Hayes deal looks as good as it does, is because Kevin Hayes, first of all, you knew he was going to be a fit in the locker room. Kevin Hayes is one of the best locker room guys in the NHL right now. But you knew Kevin Hayes was going to be a fit in your lineup this season and next. You knew Kevin Hayes was going to bring certain, talents, certain skill sets that was going to fit with what Mike Sullivan wants, with what Kyle Dubas wants for the bottom six, with what these line mates are going to want out of their center. So that's why you went out and got him, and you got him a fresh start because the St. Louis Blues were trying to make some very, very hectic moves, right? The Kevin Hayes trade was made in order for them to offer sheet both Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. They wanted to do something crazy. They needed the money off the books. The Penguins ended up being the broker. Can you find current situations like that? I think 100% that's what you should be trying to do, but the player has to fit. You can't just go out and bring in, if you were another team's Tristan Jarry and say, hey, we'll take that on because, whatever. I think the player has to fit because they're not an Anaheim right now. They're not a San Jose right now. They're not looking to just start the rebuild and then burn it to the ground and, hey, we're going to be bad for about 3 or 4 years. No, they're looking to play the middle here. And you can't do that if you're just bringing on bad players. Let's go to Chris's question here. If you trade away Pettersson as a playoff rental, is there any reason to not try and re-sign him as a free agent? I think it's going to be a similar situation to Jake Guentzel. Could the Penguins have traded him to Carolina and then brought him back? Yeah, they could have. Once you pull that trigger, is it likely that that player is going to come back? No, especially considering the fact that the Penguins and Pettersson's camp have not been conversing and have not been negotiating a new contract. There's no framework. Seems like there's no future. Now, would Pettersson like to come back? Again, according to Josh Yohe in that piece in the Athletic earlier today, it seems like Marcus Pettersson would be open to coming back to Pittsburgh. But as of right now, it's unlikely whenever you trade a player away as a playoff rental that they're going to walk to free agency and say, well, I'll come back to Pittsburgh, because somebody might offer him a better contract. Somebody might offer him an opportunity to go to a team that's going to be at the top of the standings in the next couple of years, where there is no guarantee that the Penguins will even be in the playoffs the next couple of years. So a lot of things happen once you trade that player away. You trade away negotiating rights until July 1st. And a lot of things can happen between now and July 1st that opens up the players' opportunities in different cities. Like I said, Jake Guentzel last year, they had been negotiating a contract. They had actually been trying to get to a deal with Jake Guentzel throughout last season. They didn't. They traded him away. He went to Carolina, and then lo and behold, the Tampa Bay Lightning offer him a good contract and an opportunity to compete year after year after year. It doesn't hurt that Florida is a non-state tax state. That helps. So could they do it? Yes. Is it likely? I would say no. Let's see if there's any other questions here before we go for today. Let's go to Kris again, and then we'll have... Sorry, just reading through some of these. Yeah, Kris again. And then we'll go to Nas, and then we'll close out the show. Let's start with Kris, who says, oh, that was the wrong one. Kris says, the more you can get, the more you're willing to retain. If you're rebuilding with an eye 2 to 3 years out, shouldn't you have the cap space to retain for a better return? You could have the cap space to retain, but let's not act like this isn't an organization that doesn't like to retain salary. This is a general manager that doesn't like to retain salary. He is currently with a couple players, but probably not somebody that's willing to retain, especially if that's upwards of $2 million and over a couple years. If it's 1 year, I could see Kyle Dubas doing it, but retaining salary on Tristan Jarry for 3 years, I don't see him wanting to do that. Retaining salary on Ryan Graves for 4 years, I don't see him wanting to do that. But the problem with this logic here is they are rebuilding with an eye 2 to 3 years out, but they're doing that with Sidney Crosby. They're doing that with Evgeni Malkin. And when you do that, you can't just bring in bad players, because they're going to try to give those guys opportunities to elevate a team into a playoff spot. And you can't do that by simply saying, yeah, we'll bring in Pavel Datsyuk contracts because it gets us a first-round pick, when Datsyuk was never going to play another game again. I think the Blackhawks did the same thing with like Nicholas Hjalmarsson. Like if that's what you're talking about, Pens aren't going to be one of those teams. Let's close this out with Nas26, who says, no team offered enough to get Swayman or Allmark. It's why they kept both. The asking price would have been high. Why did they... Wait, sorry. Trying to figure out the question here. No team offered enough to get Swayman or Allmark before last season, and the Boston Bruins kept both because the asking price would have been high. Why would they have just kept both? Because they thought both could take them to a potential Stanley Cup, because they liked the duo, and the duo worked. That was a really good 1-2. Wasn't a 1A, 1B. It was kind of a 1-1 situation because Swayman was very good. Allmark was coming off of Vezina season. I'm not sure how it relates to the Penguins, but in general, if you want to ask NHL questions, I'll try to give my opinion on it. But yeah, they kept the asking price high for Linus Ullmark for a very long time. And then eventually they got to the point where they had to re-sign Swayman. They had to a long-term extension, and they could not sign him to a long-term extension and eat the long-term big money contract they currently had for Linus Ullmark. So it just got to the point where they couldn't afford both. But when they could, right, when Swayman wasn't as expensive, why wouldn't you pull the trigger just to get somebody? Why would you keep the price high? Because they didn't have to trade him. So I think that's why the Boston Bruins decided to keep Swayman and Allmark probably one more year than expected, because they didn't have to pay Swayman yet. And once they actually had to pay Swayman, that's when Allmark was eventually sent out the door. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Thank you so much to everybody for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.